Vinyl from the Fringe, episode 4. Hey everybody, welcome back to Vinyl from the Fringe. Sorry it's been a minute. I was actually sick over Christmas, and now I'm at the point where I can go 20 minutes without coughing for 5. So we are back, where we will be talking about records that you may not have in your collection, and my wife probably wishes I didn't have in mine. But today we've got 2 pretty good records, I think. One is the least fringiest record that I may ever do on this podcast. It was a double platinum album. It was a big hit. It charted at number 2 on the billboards, and it was released in 1978. But when I was researching this record, actually when I did a listened through it, it really struck me as giving me an impression of the band that I hadn't had before. And then when I did some research, it turned out to have a pretty interesting story. And that record, drum roll, is going to be The Who, Who Are You? Now, everybody knows the title track. The title track, Who Are You, was the CSI, the original CSI Las Vegas theme song, the opening. It's not the Miami, the one that starts, yow, but it's more like, who are you? Who, I really wanna, who, but yeah. Those 2 songs are kind of similar. I mean, they're both by The Who. But yeah, Who Are You? The title track on this was an extremely popular song. I think it's really well known. But getting a little bit ahead of myself there. When I listened through this record, my first thought was like, wow, The Who, I mean, nobody ever sits around and says The Who had some really interesting synth work in their music. And in this album they do. The whole first side is riddled with I don't want to call it synth pop, but they definitely were going more in a like prog rock direction at the time. Disco was waning in popularity, punk was increasing in popularity, and instead of going with more of a gritty sort of vibe, they doubled down on their synth work that they'd started earlier in the 70s with like Baba O'Reilly and some of those other songs that if they didn't have synths in them, they sound synthy. Bob O'Reilly has those kind of like arpy sounds in them, arpeggios. But this, like I said, this album came out in 1978, and it was 3 years after their previous album. They'd been plagued with accidents. I think the drummer broke his arm, falling out of a car or something, and guitar player Pete Townsend cut his hand on a window. Like all kinds of stuff happened that just sort of put this off. And then reading accounts of when it finally came together, it was work. People who were involved say it seemed like nobody wanted to work. Keith Moon was having problems with his alcoholism. He was having problems where he wouldn't or wasn't able to learn the songs. There's a song that was in 6/8. I think it was The Music Must Change. I think it was the last track on side A. Double check that. I'll have to put it in the notes. But they had a song in 6/8, which is sort of an odd time signature. But it's like the time signature that The Animals' House of the Rising Sun is in. It's actually 2 triplets squished together. So a triplet is like waltzing, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But with 6/8, you could waltz to it or walk to it, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you could walk on like the ones and fours, or you could waltz to the couplets. It's a little bit of a hard time signature to drum. And just anecdotally, especially while drunk, like I knew a local band that had a song in 6/8, and if their drummer had too many beers, he couldn't play it. So it's kind of that's maybe a theme with 6/8. I don't know, only 2 instances of knowing it. It's sort of a small sample section, but yeah. So in that song, they actually took his drumming out and replaced it with footsteps. Which is kind of weird, but the sort of downer on this album is that the drummer Keith Moon, who's pictured here in the chair that says "not to be taken away," this was kind of prophetic. He died about a month after the album was released. He was actually posed in that chair backwards because the photographer said he had the distended stomach of an alcoholic, and he wanted to hide that, which that does. And his alcoholism almost got him kicked out of the band during the production of this record. Pete Townsend confronted him and said he had to basically, sober up, air out, or be replaced. And that led to him seeking the help of a doctor. The doctor prescribed him, I got notes here, clomethazole, because he had a physical dependency on alcohol. If your alcoholism is bad enough, if you stop drinking cold turkey, it can be life-threatening. This drug that he was prescribed was not to be prescribed to people who were not under direct medical supervision. That is like admitted to a hospital for their alcoholism. So this doctor broke those guidelines, and it's not clear from what I read that he thoroughly explained what kind of drug this was. He gave him general directions like don't take more than 3 in a day and don't combine it with alcohol. Just take one when you want to drink. Well, after an argument one evening, Keith Moon, the drummer, took 32 of them, and he was dead after only 6 were digested. It was a big there was a big looking into, or big investigation of that. Numerous doctors said this shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have been prescribed this. It's not clear he knew that would take his life. So I don't think it was considered a suicide. But it also kind of struck me, like looking into it, like we know how a lot of classic rock musicians died. Like we know Jimi Hendrix aspirated. Janis Joplin famously OD'd on heroin. Jim Morrison died in a bathtub in Paris. But I'd never heard of how Keith Moon died. It's also sort of weird that he died in the same apartment building, in the same bedroom as Cass Elliot, Mama Cass, from the Mamas and the Papas, that she died in 4 years earlier. And in fact, the person who owned that apartment complex didn't want to rent it to Keith Moon because he thought it was cursed. So that's kind of crazy. So I could see how this record may have quickly become difficult for The Who. They did replace Keith Moon. They did continue on. They released more records and they played more tours. But I think they only ever played 2 songs off this album. Who Are You? And I believe Sister Disco was the other single released off this record. And let's get to that. The first side of this album, Pete Townsend, the guitar player, also arranges a lot of the synthesizers. And there's a lot of synthesizer on side one. There's not as much on side two. But side one is really cool. There's a lot of, on the first track, New Song, which is kind of, I'm going to say lazily named. That song has the guitar and the synth sort of like weaving in and out. For the lead, it ramps up in a lot of places, but then it just feels disjointed and it doesn't go anywhere. And for the next song, Had Enough, that sounds more like a generic 80s rock song with synth and guitar. I had in my notes here, I had a ELO question mark, Electric Light Orchestra, like maybe they were somewhat influenced by them. But then 905 starts off with these really cool synth ARPs. Pete Townsend was using an ARP 2600, I believe. And in the next song, Sister Disco, supposedly he had spent hours programming this ARP 2600. There's a lot of really busy, fast synth work in this one. But the thing that really stood out with me is the overuse of the splash cymbal. The splash cymbal has a real it's sort of it's flatter. It doesn't ring as much as a normal crash cymbal. And they just laid on this, which kind of surprised me because Glyn Johns was one of the producers on this record. And Glyn Johns is famous in audio engineering for inventing a 3-mic technique for recording drums. Because back then they had limited tracks that they were working with. Even big names sometimes recorded on 4-track tape. They might have had 8. They might have 8 tracks or more, but you still have to really conserve the number of tracks that you're using when you're limited like that. It's not like today where on a computer you can have like literally unlimited tracks. So what Glyn Johns did is he had a technique where he put one microphone on the bass drum, the big drum. He had another one overhead that was pointing at the snare. And then he had another one that was sort of like aimed across the tops of the drums in the drum set. And the thing that he sort of set him apart was he made sure that the distance between the overhead mic and the sort of side sweeping mic, they were the same distance to the snare, because the snare is really key in rock music for, that sort of like boom bap. That is always the snare. The snare is like a big element of rock music. So, I mean, Glyn Johns really understood what sounded good in terms of drumming, and he really let like every bar, at the end of every bar, there's the splash cymbal, and it gets almost annoying after a while. On Sister Disco, then with The Music Must Change, splash comes in again. My notes are even on Who Are You? It's like, again with the splash. Like, what's the big deal with the splash cymbal on this record? But that might have been Keith just kind of leaning on something that he could do, because he was, he was at odds with his alcoholism. Other stories from the time, or for people who were there, say that he didn't believe in himself anymore, and he was disappointed in his sort of like backsliding ability. He was frustrating himself, and that was all kind of what came together for him to try and get sober, and then missteps in that attempt killed him. The second side is a lot more straight ahead rock and roll. Trick of the Light has a stoner rock vibe to it, kind of like Big and Woolly. Guitar and pen kind of builds and then doesn't go anywhere. And this is where you start realizing that The Who had a formula, which isn't bad. They have a lot of like, the energy in the song is very dynamic. It'll ramp up and then come down and ramp up, and then it's not quite as like juxtaposed as like say like Nirvana or the Pixies, where it's like loud, quiet, loud, quiet. There's a more smoothness to how the energy comes up, and then there's like a denouement, and then it comes back up again. And the lead singer, Roger Daltrey, does his screaming stuff. Some of the songs sound really big, and they sound really almost theatric. And he does that a lot. Like he's known for that scream on "Won't Be Fooled Again," like yeah. So they have this dynamic energy. They have Roger Daltrey doing Roger Daltrey stuff. They have Pete Townsend doing Pete Townsend stuff. They have Keith Moon, kind of trying to hang in there. And on a lot of these, it just doesn't come together. But then when it does for Who Are You, boy, does it come together. I mean, when it's good, it's real good. And it made me kind of realize, like, a lot of the mythical bands of that era, the Doors, the Rolling Stones, even the Beatles, CCR. If you buy their actual albums and not their best of, you're going to hear tracks that just never quite made it. They weren't as good as the ones that we all know and love. But they are interesting to listen to, because it does give you that sort of deeper appreciation for the artist, and kind of understanding, like what they're trying to get at, because you do get a sense of, like, here's the things that they try. And when it works great. When it doesn't, you can still listen to it. It's just not that awesome. And the other thing about this album is that I think The Who, I want to say they broke out in '67. I know they had Magic Bus around that time. I Can See for Miles, tracks like that. So by '78, they'd been around for 11 years. And they're a rock band, and they're trying to stay relevant. And I think a lot of their synth work really kind of reflects that, that I don't want to say like just trying to hang in there, but, trying to put something new, trying to evolve, trying to find some sort of way forward in a genre that is just inherently anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian. It values the new over more traditional to a certain extent, even though it's mostly based off of blues, which is a traditional traditional music form. But this album is super cheap. You can find them on Discogs for $2 plus shipping. And if you like that sort of mix of guitar and synth, this is a really fun one to pick up. And especially if you like Who Are You, that song, it's great. It doesn't have as many classic Who tracks on it as, say, like Who's Next, or Tommy maybe. But it is, it's a good one, and it's kind of like that crossover from the first guard of rock and roll, almost, the first generation to go through that, into what would become the 80s and new wave. And that brings us to the next record. The next record is from 1983. Let me switch my notes here. The next record is Aldo Nova's Subject. Aldo Nova had one hit. The hit, I believe, was called Fantasy. And it was off of his first self-titled album, Aldo Nova. This is his second record. It was not as popular as the first. And for that reason, you can get this for the low price of $1 on plus shipping on Discogs. I paid $6 for this. Sometimes you'll see these little stickers in the upper corner. I'm just gonna plug my friend here. You can see them on these two. When they have that little sticker up there, that usually means I got them from this guy I know named Keith. Keith buys whole record collections and then sells them off. And he does it through Facebook, and he's really cool in that he'll hold like several records for me, sometimes for like a month. Sometimes I forget like what I told him I wanted to buy, and he'll remind me. Everybody needs a Keith. He's a really cool guy. I like talking with him, and he finds some really cool stuff, especially off the beaten path stuff that helps me find music for this podcast. So. Look on Facebook for some local record groups and find yourself a Keith, because I really found some cool records that way. And I'm not buying whole record collections. My wife would. No, because then you have to sell whole record collections. And Keith has a lot of records, garage full of them. It's a great place to visit. But one of the cool things about this Aldo Nova record, and this really takes you down sort of a rabbit hole of record collecting, is that this is a RL Masterdisk. To understand what that means, you have to understand a little bit about the record-making process. And how a record is made is that an artist will go into the studio, they'll record their record, they'll record their music, I should say, and then they'll mix, the sound engineer will mix that down into a stereo, generally reel-to-reel, because that plays at a higher speed, has better fidelity. Although these days it's probably a sound file of some sort. But anyways, they mix it down to a final stereo mix, and they send that to a mastering company. In this case, the mastering company is called Masterdisk. And RL stands for Robert Ludwig. I believe Robert Ludwig was maybe like in charge of Masterdisk. My history on that's a little fuzzy, but he was one of the mastering engineers that worked on so many great albums. AC/DC albums, ZZ Top albums, Frank Zappa albums. Yes, I mean, just there's tons of them. You can look them up online. There's lists online of records stamped RL Masterdisk. Sometimes they're stamped on one side and not the other. That means he didn't master the other side usually. Back to the record making process. So the mastering company gets this stereo master, and they have to consider what media is going on, because how they will make that stereo mix sound the best depends on the medium that it's eventually going to be on. For records, one of the things you have to do is take a lot of bass out, because the groove has like the right channel and the left channel, or maybe if you're watching, it's the left channel and the right channel, or I don't know. But either way, each channel's kind of like on one side of the groove, and if you have a lot of bass, that wave gets big, and it can actually pop the needle right out of the groove. So one of the things on a stereo is a lot of times you will see a phono input, and that'll be different than like a tape or an aux input. And if you plug something into it, it'll be really bassy. Likewise, if you have a record player, like a normal record player, not like a Carlson or whatever they're called, not like one of those suitcase ones, but if you have like a regular Sony or Technics record player and you plug it into an aux connection or a tape connection, it's going to sound terrible. It's going to sound tinny, like there's no bass. So one of the things they do when they master it is they have to reduce the bass because it gets added back later on. They do other things to, sweeten the sound. Basically, they want to make it sound as good as it possibly can on that medium. And, that's the mastering process. So once they get that mix down, they then cut a lacquer. And a lacquer is not a vinyl, but it's a lathed lacquer disc. And that is going to actually be the Masterdisk. Then the process from there is that they put it in some metal salt solutions, and it sounds kind of like a mixture of almost like photochemistry and almost like metal plating. So basically, these metals adhere to the lacquer, but not too tight. And then you adhere other metals to those metals, and then by the end of it, you pull the lacquer out of these solutions, and you can peel the metal discs off the lacquer, and those are your stampers. You then warm up a puck of vinyl, slap some stickers on it, squish it between these metal discs, and you will get you'll get a vinyl record. And that's how they're made. Now, each lacquer, from what I was reading, can basically be responsible for stamping up to 100,000 of the final vinyl records. So, if it went platinum, that's like, what, 1 million records? So not every single one of them is going to be an RL Masterdisk. This one is, but Aldo Nova's Subject probably didn't sell in the numbers. I mean, they're probably all Masterdisk RLs, and you can tell because in the runout, and this part I can show you. I can't show you the Masterdisk RL because it's so tiny. I mean, it's like maybe that big. It's about an inch long. And it's actually stamped into what they call the dead wax or the runout. And let me see if you can. Yeah, you can see a little bit there. You can see the grooves, and you can see the smooth part real close to the sticker there. In the smooth part, oops, and I'm trying not to bump my mic. In the smooth part, it'll be stamped Masterdisk RL or RL Masterdisk. And basically, what that means, I used the wrong record. That's fine. I was like, wait a minute, I'm not seeing it. I almost need reading glasses to see it. It's really, I do need reading glasses to see it. It's really tiny. And if you see one of those on a record, that means you are probably listening to the best the best mastery of that record. And Robert Ludwig was actively mastering records for a long time. I think the Foo Fighters are on that list, like Dire Straits, Brother in Arms. Just a ton of really great records. And if you're collecting records and you want to collect some really good music, go through that Masterdisk RL list. If I can, I'll put a link in the description. Maybe I'll make a Google Drives file with them in there. But he is just, he was the go-to for years and years and years for just great, mostly rock and roll mastering. But back to Aldo Nova. This guy is a killer guitar player. He did have a short solo career, but then he went on to work with people like Bon Jovi. Most of his, Bon Jovi and Clay Aiken, oddly enough, but most of his writing and producing credits go with Celine Dion. So he did sort of have a career beyond his solo music career. And the first song on the first side is I think it's Armageddon, Race Cars. It's got building arps, sci-fi sound effects. It's just a weird track. And then it gets into the song Armageddon, which is so 80s, it's almost cliche. It's got like sci-fi voices in it, metal guitar, keyboards, huge drums, effects. It's pretty crazy. Some of my notes on some of these songs are like, if you're like an independent filmmaker and you're making something set in the 80s and you want that like synthy metal almost cheesy 80s sound, pick up this record because you can probably license these songs for not a crazy amount of money, and they all sound like have I heard this before? They all sound just so 80s. It's amazing. Um, there's Hey Operator, which I believe is a cover. There's like searing guitar intro that goes into some slide guitar, some metal, hard rock. Cry Baby Cry is like more of like a synth rock pop song. Victim of a Broken Heart is a synth ballad. It's super 80s. There's another one on the second side. Which one is it? Yeah. All Night Long. My comments on that one is so 80s. It could be a synth intro or like or like a montage for like a John Hughes film or something. Always Be Mine. That's a slower synth pop. My thoughts on that one were like it sounds like a song that would be like slow dance to in like an almost like 16 Candles type of movie. I'm sure Stranger Things has already like picked out their music tracks. They're not going to pick anything from this, but I mean, it would fit. This was 83, but it sounds like it's a little bit more modern than 83, if that makes any sense. It's definitely ahead of its time. Great guitar work on this. There's some songs that are AC/DC-ish, like Hold Back the Night. There's other songs like Paradise that sounds a little more Def Leppard-ish. But all of them are really like hard rock to metal-y with synth. Some of them get a little poppy, and it's really a fun record to listen to. And like I said, it's one of those things where this wasn't super popular. It didn't have a whole ton of airplay, but every single song kind of sounds familiar in a bit of a sense, and that's sort of the thing that makes us enjoy music. We like hearing things that are familiar in some respect. They're not like totally out there, alien, dissonant, and all that. Like we can reference them, but we also like within that ability to be familiar and have like a reference point for music. We also like it to be new enough and novel enough for us to have that sort of like excitement of exploring it. And I really got that off of this album for $1. It's worth it. For $6, $5. You might find it crate diving in like the $3 bin at your local record store. And I would say pick it up if you're into that 80s metal synth stuff, because it really does that really, really well. Also, you may have noticed, and let me turn these guys off. I got a new microphone. I'm pretty excited about this, and I think it sounds really great. I got it for Christmas. It's really neat in that it's made by the company Neat. Oh, I got the box here. My wife got this for me for Christmas, and I'm super excited. The King B2, they're not sponsoring or paying for this at all. This was something I researched and had on my wish list. As you know, everything I saw was basically pointed to this being a mic that punches above its weight limit. Everyone says like an under $150 mic has no business sounding this good. And so far, I'm tempted to agree with the demos that I did for myself with it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the Who Are You, Aldo Nova Subject, how this mic sounds. I've learned a bit interacting with people already in the comments, and it's always fun to see what people know about some of these records. And I can't know everything about them. 1978, I was like 3 years old, so it's not necessarily firsthand experience. But then again, we've all heard that CSI intro. But yeah, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and leave a comment below if I skipped over or missed anything. It's been fun doing another vinyl from the Fringe, and I'll see you next time.